The city was loud, restless, and alive. Cars honked without patience. Motorbikes weaved through traffic like they were chasing time itself. Street vendors shouted over each other, trying to sell fruit, snacks, anything that could earn them a few coins. People rushed past in all directions, some heading to work, others chasing deadlines, and many simply trying to keep up with the fast-moving world around them. No one slowed down. No one stopped. On the edge of a crowded sidewalk, near a cracked wall covered in faded posters, sat an old man. At first glance, he looked like part of the street itself, just another forgotten piece of the city. His clothes were worn and dusty, hanging loosely on his thin body. His hair was grey and uncombed, falling unevenly over his forehead. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on his knees. And he was crying. Not loudly. Not in a way that would draw attention. His tears fell quietly, slipping down his wrinkled face as if they had been there for a long time. His shoulders shook now and then, but he tried to keep it contained, as though even his pain didn't want to disturb anyone. People passed him by. A man in a clean suit walked past, talking on his phone. He glanced at the old man for a second, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then he turned away, his voice growing louder as he continued his conversation, as if nothing had happened. A group of teenagers approached, laughing loudly. One of them noticed the old man and nudged his friend. They slowed down for a moment, whispering and chuckling. One of them shook his head, muttering something under his breath, before they all walked on, their laughter fading into the noise of the street. A woman holding a shopping bag tightened her grip on her child's hand as they passed. She pulled the child a little closer to her side, her face tense. Without saying much, she guided the child away from the old man, as if he was something to be avoided. Others didn't even look. They walked past him like he didn't exist. Like he wasn't sitting there, breaking quietly. The old man lowered his head further. His eyes fixed on the ground, watching as countless feet moved past him, shoes polished and clean, sandals worn and dusty, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Each step seemed to remind him of how the world kept moving, no matter who got left behind. In his hand, he held something tightly. It was small and worn, barely noticeable unless someone looked closely. His fingers curled around it as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. For a brief moment, he opened his hand just enough to glance at it. A faded photograph. His eyes softened, and for a second, the pain on his face changed into something deeper, something heavier. Then his hand closed again. A loud horn blared nearby, snapping the moment apart. The city's noise rushed back in, swallowing everything else. The old man flinched slightly, his shoulders shrinking as if he were trying to disappear even more. Another tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, almost nervously, as though he felt embarrassed, even though no one was watching. Or maybe because no one was. Time passed, but nothing changed. The crowd kept moving. The noise never stopped. The old man remained in the same place, his quiet sorrow lost in the chaos around him. It was strange. So many people. So many eyes. And yet, not one of them truly saw him. Not one of them stopped to ask if he was okay. Not one of them cared enough to notice that a human being was sitting there, falling apart. And in that moment, something felt deeply wrong. Because in a world so full of people, how could someone be so completely invisible? The old man closed his eyes for a brief second, as if holding back more tears. His grip tightened around the photograph, his knuckles turning pale. The city moved on. But he didn't. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise and movement, his silent pain waited, hoping, maybe, for someone, anyone, to finally stop. The old man sat still, but his mind was far away. The noise of the street faded into the background. The honking cars, the rushing footsteps, the loud voices, they all became distant, like echoes from another world. His eyes remained fixed on the ground, but he wasn't seeing the pavement anymore. He was seeing something else. Something from long ago. His fingers slowly loosened, and once again, the small object in his hand came into view. It was the same faded photograph. The edges were worn, the surface scratched with time. But the image still held its meaning. He looked at it carefully. And just like that, the past came rushing back. Years ago, there had been a house. It wasn't big or fancy. The walls were simple, painted in soft colors that had faded over time. The roof leaked during heavy rain, and the furniture was old. But it was warm. It was alive. It was home. In that house, The old man had not been old. He was strong then. His back was straight, his step steady, his voice full of life. His hands, now weak and trembling, had once been firm and skilled. He worked every day, sometimes as a teacher in a small school, helping children learn their first words. Other times, he took extra work, fixing things, helping neighbors, doing whatever he could to support his family. He was known as a kind man, someone people trusted. But the most important part of his life wasn't his work. It was his family. There was laughter in that house. Real laughter. The kind that filled the air and made even the smallest moments feel special. A woman's gentle voice would call out from the kitchen. Children's footsteps would run across the floor. Evenings were filled with stories, shared meals, and simple joy. He remembered sitting at the table, watching his family smile. Back then, he had everything. The old man's fingers tightened slightly around the photograph. The memory shifted. The laughter began to fade. Time had changed things. It started slowly, almost quietly. Illness came first. His wife, once full of life, began to grow weak. At first, it seemed small, just tiredness, just a cough. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into something heavier. Hospital visits became frequent. Bills began to pile up. He worked harder. Longer hours. More jobs. Less sleep. But no matter how much he tried, it was never enough. The house that once felt warm began to feel heavy. The laughter grew softer. The silence grew longer. And then, one day, it stopped completely. She was gone. The old man's breathing grew uneven as he sat on the sidewalk. A tear slipped down his cheek. After that, nothing was the same. The children changed too. Grief made them distant. The home that once held them together now felt broken. Conversations became arguments. Smiles became rare. Slowly, they began to drift away, first emotionally, then physically. One left for another city. Another stopped visiting. Calls became shorter, then less frequent. Then, nothing. The old man had tried to hold on. He kept working, even when his body began to fail him. His strength wasn't what it used to be. His hands, once steady, began to shake. His steps slowed down. Employers stopped calling him. People who once respected him now overlooked him. Opportunities disappeared. Money ran out. And one day, the house was gone too. Back in the present, a strong gust of wind blew dust across the street. The old man blinked, pulled back from the past. But the pain stayed. He looked down at the photograph again. It showed a moment frozen in time, his younger self standing beside his wife and children. They were smiling. Happy. Whole. For a second, his lips trembled, almost forming a smile. But it didn't last. Because he knew the truth. That life no longer existed. His grip tightened around the photo, as if he were afraid it might slip away like everything else had. His shoulders began to shake again. Now it made sense. His tears were not sudden. They were not weak. They were the weight of years, of loss, of silence, of being forgotten. Every tear carried a memory. Every breath carried a piece of pain he had held inside for far too long. People continued to walk past him. They saw an old man crying. But they didn't see the life he had lived. They didn't see the love he had lost. They didn't see the battles he had fought alone. The old man slowly lowered his head again. The photograph remained in his hand, pressed close to his chest now, as if it were the only thing he had left. And maybe it was. The city kept moving. But his past refused to let go. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the pain and silence, there was still a small, fragile part of him holding on. Waiting. Not for money. Not for pity. But for something much simpler. For someone to see him, not as a burden, not as a stranger, but as a man who once had a life, a family, and a reason to smile. The present rushed back in like a loud wave. The old man sat in the same place, but the world around him had not slowed down, not even for a second. The street was still alive with noise and movement. People kept walking, talking, rushing, as if every second mattered more than anything else. As if nothing else existed. As if he didn't exist. A man in a sharp suit approached from the corner. His shoes were polished, his tie perfectly straight. He walked fast, speaking loudly into his phone, his voice filled with urgency. "Yes, I told you, I'll handle it," he said, his tone impatient. As he passed by the old man, his eyes flickered down for a brief second. Just 1 second. Their worlds almost touched. But then, just as quickly, the businessman frowned slightly, as if annoyed by what he saw. He shifted his path just enough to avoid getting too close. His expression tightened, not with concern, but with discomfort. And then he walked on. His voice grew louder again, his conversation more important than the quiet pain sitting just a few steps behind him. The old man didn't look up. It was as if he already knew what would happen. A few moments later, a group of teenagers came walking down the sidewalk. They were loud, carefree, laughing about something that seemed very funny to them. Their energy stood in sharp contrast to the stillness of the old man. One of them noticed him. "Hey, look at that," he said, nudging his friend. They slowed down. Another teenager leaned slightly forward, squinting at the old man. "What's wrong with him?" he muttered, half curious, half amused. A third one chuckled. "Probably just another beggar," he said carelessly. Their laughter grew louder. The old man's shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't move. His eyes remained lowered, fixed on the ground. He had heard words like these before, too many times. One of the teenagers shook his head, smirking. "People like him just sit around all day," he added. Then, just as quickly as they had slowed down, they moved on again, laughing, joking, forgetting. For them, it was just a moment. For him, it was another quiet wound. The crowd continued to flow. A woman approached, holding the hand of a young child. The child's small steps struggled to keep up with her pace. As they got closer, the child's eyes wandered, and then stopped. The child saw the old man. Really saw him. "Amy," the child said softly, tugging at her hand. But the woman noticed too. Before the child could say anything more, her grip tightened. Her face changed instantly, alert, cautious. "Don't look," she said quickly, her voice low but firm. She pulled the child closer, guiding them away from the old man without stopping. Her steps became faster, almost hurried, as if she needed to create distance. "But he's crying," the child whispered, glancing back. "It's not our problem," she replied, not even turning around. And just like that, they were gone too. The old man's breathing became slower. His tears didn't stop, but they changed. They became quieter, almost invisible. It was as if even his sorrow was beginning to fade, not because the pain was gone, but because hope was. His hands trembled slightly as they rested in his lap. The photograph was still there, but now his grip had loosened, as if even that small connection to his past was becoming harder to hold onto. The world kept moving. Feet passed by him again and again, step after step, each one carrying someone forward into their own life, their own worries, their own goals. But none of them stopped. Not one. Time seemed strange in that moment. For the crowd, it moved quickly. For the old man, it stood still. He was stuck, trapped in a space where nothing changed, where no one came, where no voice called out his name. His shoulders slowly sank lower. His head bowed further. And for the first time, there was something deeper than sadness in his expression. There was emptiness. Another tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away this time. He just let it fall. Maybe because it didn't matter anymore. Maybe because he was too tired to try. Around him, life continued without pause. People laughed. Phones rang. Cars moved. Conversations filled the air. The world was alive. But he felt completely alone inside it. And in that heavy, silent moment, something inside him began to break. Not loudly. Not suddenly. But slowly, deeply, quietly. Like a light fading away. Yet somewhere, just beyond the noise and the movement, something was about to change. Because not everyone had walked past him. Not yet. And somewhere in that crowd, a small pair of eyes had seen what everyone else chose to ignore. The street was still loud. Cars passed by. People moved quickly. Voices mixed into one endless sound. Nothing had changed. Or at least, it seemed that way. Among the crowd, a small figure walked more slowly than the others. It was a child. A school bag hung loosely over their shoulders, slightly tilted to one side. Their steps were not rushed like everyone else's. Instead, they walked with quiet curiosity, their eyes moving from one thing to another, watching people, noticing small details others ignored. The child wasn't thinking about time. They were thinking about the world. As they walked, their gaze wandered, until it stopped. Right there, on the side of the sidewalk. The old man. The child slowed down. For a moment, everything else faded. The noise, the movement, the rush. Their eyes stayed fixed on him, studying something no one else seemed to notice. His hands. They were shaking. Not slightly, but enough to show weakness. Enough to show that something wasn't right. Then the child noticed his face. The tears. They weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. But they didn't stop. The child's expression changed. Curiosity turned into concern. "He's crying," the child whispered softly, almost to themselves. No one else stopped. People continued to walk past, just like before. The same indifference. The same distance. But the child didn't move. Their feet felt heavy, as if something inside them was holding them in place. A voice echoed in the child's mind. "Don't talk to strangers. Stay away from people you don't know. Be careful." The warnings were clear. Familiar. Repeated many times before. The child hesitated. Their fingers tightened around the strap of their school bag. Their body leaned slightly forward, then pulled back again. They looked around. Everyone else was ignoring him. Maybe they should too. Maybe it wasn't their place. Maybe someone else would help. But no one did. The child looked back at the old man. He hadn't moved. His head was still lowered. His shoulders still heavy. His tears still falling. And in that moment, something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. The child's heart began to beat a little faster, not out of fear, but out of something else. Something stronger. Empathy. What if he needs help? The child thought. The question stayed. It didn't go away. Again, the warnings returned. But what if it's dangerous? What if something bad happens? The child swallowed slowly, caught between fear and kindness. One step forward. Then a pause. Another glance at the crowd. Still no one stopping. The child took a deep breath. And then made a choice. Slowly, carefully, the child stepped out of the moving crowd. It felt strange. Almost like stepping into a space that didn't belong to anyone else. A quiet space in the middle of all the noise. Each step toward the old man felt heavier than the last. But the child didn't stop. The distance between them grew smaller. A few people noticed. Some glanced at the child with confusion. Others looked briefly, then turned away again, uninterested. But something had already changed. The invisible wall, the one that kept everyone away, was breaking. The child stopped just a few steps away from the old man. For a moment, they didn't speak. They just stood there, watching. Up close, everything was clearer. The lines on his face. The quiet shaking of his shoulders. The way his hands clutched something tightly, as if it was the only thing he had left. The child's chest felt tight. This wasn't just sadness. This was pain. The old man slowly became aware of a presence. Someone had stopped. That alone felt unusual. His head lifted slightly, hesitant, almost unsure. His eyes, tired and heavy, looked up. And for the first time in a long while, they met someone else's. The child froze for a second. This was the moment. The point where they could still turn back. The point where fear could win. But it didn't. The child took one final small step forward. Breaking the silence. Breaking the distance. Breaking the pattern that everyone else had followed. And just like that, in a world full of people who chose to walk away, one child chose to stay. The noise of the city didn't stop. The crowd didn't pause. But something important had shifted. Because for the first time that day, the old man was no longer invisible. The old man and the child looked at each other in silence. For a brief moment, the noise of the city seemed to fade again. Cars still passed. People still rushed. But in that small space between them, something quiet and fragile began to form. The child shifted slightly, nervous but determined. Up close, the old man's face looked even more tired. His eyes were red, his cheeks wet. His hands still trembled, holding tightly onto the faded photograph. The child swallowed. Then, in a soft, careful voice, they spoke. "Are you okay?" The words were simple. But to the old man, they felt unfamiliar. He blinked slowly, as if he hadn't heard correctly. For a second, he looked around, almost expecting the question to be meant for someone else. But there was no one else. The child was looking straight at him, waiting. The old man's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He wasn't used to this. Not anymore. People didn't ask him questions. People didn't stop. People didn't care. And yet, here was this child, standing in front of him, as if he mattered. The old man's grip on the photograph loosened just a little. His shoulders, still heavy, lifted slightly, just enough to show that something inside him had shifted. The child noticed his silence. They didn't step back. Instead, they slowly sat down beside him on the edge of the sidewalk. The ground was rough and dusty, but the child didn't seem to care. For the first time that day, the old man was not sitting alone. The child opened their school bag. Carefully, they pulled out a small lunchbox. It was simple, slightly worn from use. They opened it and looked inside. There was some food left, just a little. Without hesitation, the child held it out toward the old man. "You can have this," they said gently. The old man stared at the food, then at the child. His eyes filled again, but this time, the emotion was different. It wasn't just pain. It was disbelief. His hands trembled more as he slowly reached out, almost unsure if he was allowed to accept it. For a second, his hand stopped halfway, as if waiting for the moment to disappear. But it didn't. The child kept holding the food out, their expression calm, patient. Finally, the old man took it, very carefully, as if it was something precious. His fingers brushed lightly against the child's hand. That small touch carried more meaning than words. The old man lowered his gaze, looking at the food in his hands. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his emotions too heavy to hide anymore. He didn't eat right away. Instead, he held it close, as if he needed to feel it first, needed to believe it was real. The child watched him quietly. There was no fear now, only concern, only kindness. After a moment, the old man lifted the food slowly and took a small bite. His movements were slow, careful, almost respectful. As he ate, his eyes closed for a brief second. Not because of the taste, but because of what it meant. Someone had shared with him. Someone had cared. Tears rolled down his cheeks again. But these tears felt different. Softer. Warmer. The child noticed the photograph still in his hand. "What is that?" they asked gently, pointing toward it. The old man looked down. For a moment, his expression changed again, pain mixed with something deeper. Slowly, he turned the photograph toward the child. The image was faded, but clear enough. A family. Smiling. Happy. The child leaned in slightly, studying it. "Is that your family?" they asked. The old man nodded faintly. No words. Just a small, quiet nod. But it said everything. His fingers traced the edge of the photograph, his touch gentle, almost careful not to damage it further. His eyes lingered on each face in the picture. His lips trembled again. The child didn't speak. They didn't need to. They understood. For the first time in a long while, the old man didn't feel completely alone. He wasn't invisible anymore. Someone was sitting beside him. Someone was listening, even without words. Around them, the crowd began to notice. A man slowed down, glancing briefly at the scene. A woman paused for a second longer than before. The same street that had ignored the old man now held small pockets of attention. Curiosity, confusion, and something else. Guilt. Why was a child doing what they had not? Why had they walked past, while this small person chose to stop? The old man lifted his head slightly. His eyes, still filled with tears, looked at the child again. This time, there was something new in them. Not just sadness, but gratitude. His shoulders seemed lighter. His breathing steadier. For a moment, just a small moment, the weight he had been carrying felt less heavy. The child smiled softly. A simple smile. But it carried warmth, comfort, and something the old man had almost forgotten. Hope. The city still moved. The noise still filled the air. But something had changed. Because one small act, one simple gesture, had done what the entire crowd could not. It had reminded a broken man that he was still human. And as more eyes began to turn toward them, something else quietly started to grow. Something that had been missing from that street for a long time. Compassion. The old man held the photograph between his shaking fingers. The child leaned a little closer, careful not to touch it without permission. The picture was old, but it carried a quiet warmth. Even through the faded colors, the smiles were clear. "They look happy," the child said softly. The old man's eyes stayed on the photograph. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, very slowly, he nodded. His thumb brushed gently over one face in the picture, then another, and then stopped. There was something different in his expression now. Not just sadness. Memory. The child watched closely. "Were you with them?" the child asked, their voice filled with curiosity, but also respect. The old man lifted his eyes slightly. This time, he nodded again, but stronger. Yes. He was there. A long breath escaped his chest, as if something heavy had been waiting to come out. He looked at his own image in the photograph, young, standing tall, wearing clean clothes, a calm smile on his face. He didn't look weak then. He didn't look lost. He looked important. The child noticed it too. "You look different," the child said honestly. The old man gave a faint, almost invisible smile. It didn't last long. He slowly raised his hand, pointing toward the photo, not just at the people, but at himself. Then he tapped his chest gently. A simple gesture. But it spoke clearly. "That's you," the child whispered. The old man nodded. For the first time, the child saw him not just as a lonely old man on the street, but as someone who had lived a full life. Someone who had once stood strong. The old man's eyes moved again, this time toward the background of the photo. A building. A simple one, but full of meaning. He pointed at it. The child looked closer. "A school," the child guessed. The old man nodded again. "A teacher." The realization settled slowly in the child's mind. This man, who now sat alone, ignored by everyone, had once stood in front of a classroom, teaching, guiding, helping children learn. The child's eyes widened slightly. "You taught kids?" they asked. The old man didn't speak, but his face answered. There was a quiet pride hidden beneath the pain. He lifted his hand again, this time holding up a few fingers, then pointing outward, as if counting many people. Then he placed his hand over his heart. The meaning was simple. He had helped many. He had cared. The child understood. "You helped people, like me," they said gently. The old man looked at the child, and nodded. A silence followed. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Around them, a few people had slowed down. Some stood at a distance, watching. They couldn't hear every word, but they could see enough. The old man showing the photograph. The child listening carefully. The quiet connection between them. One man in the crowd frowned slightly. A teacher. He looked at the old man again, as if trying to see something he had missed before. Another woman lowered her gaze, her expression shifting with unease. Had they walked past someone who once helped others? Someone who once made a difference? Back on the sidewalk, the old man's hand trembled again. This time, he reached into his coat. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out something else. A folded piece of paper. Old. Worn. Creased from being opened many times. He held it for a moment, staring at it, as if deciding whether to share it. Then, with hesitation, he handed it to the child. The child took it gently, unfolding it slowly. Inside, there were a few lines, faded, but still readable. The child's eyes moved across the paper. It wasn't long, but it was enough. A letter. From years ago. Words filled with distance and coldness. A goodbye. The child's expression changed. They didn't fully understand everything, but they understood enough. Someone had left him. Someone important. The old man looked away. His face tightened again, the pain returning. He didn't need to explain. The letter said it all. Family lost. Connections broken. A life that slowly fell apart. The child carefully folded the paper again and handed it back. This time, they didn't ask questions. They didn't judge. They didn't try to fix anything. They simply sat there, closer than before. "I'm sorry," the child said quietly. 2 simple words. But they were real. The old man looked at the child again. His eyes filled with tears, but this time, they didn't fall from loneliness. They fell because someone finally understood. even just a little. In the crowd, more people had stopped. Not many, but enough. Their faces showed something new now. Not curiosity, not indifference, but guilt. They had seen him before, but they had never looked. The old man, once invisible, was now being seen for who he truly was. Not just a man on the street, but a man who had once stood with purpose. A man who had given and lost. The child's presence didn't change his past. It didn't erase his pain. But it did something just as important. It reminded him, and everyone watching, that his life still had value. Because a person is not defined by where they end up, but by the life they have lived. The old man held the photograph and the letter close to his chest again. But this time, his hands were a little steadier. And as the quiet moments stretched between them, something deeper began to form, not just between the child and the old man, but within the hearts of those watching. The moment lingered. The child sat beside the old man, quiet and steady. The old man held his photograph close, his breathing calmer than before. Around them, the city still moved, but not quite the same way. Something had shifted. At first, it was small. A man who had been standing at a distance, watching, took a step forward. He hesitated, as if unsure of himself. His eyes moved from the child, to the old man, and then to the ground. He looked uncomfortable, as if he had just realized something he didn't like. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of biscuits. For a second, he stood there, holding it, unsure what to do next. Then, with a quiet breath, he walked closer. He didn't say much. He simply bent down slightly and placed the biscuits beside the old man. A simple gesture. But it mattered. The old man looked up, surprised again. This time, he didn't hesitate as much. His eyes softened, and he gave a small nod of thanks. The man nodded back, quickly, almost shyly, and stepped aside. Another pause. Then, a woman from the crowd stepped forward. She had been the same woman who earlier pulled her child away. Now, her face looked different. No fear, only hesitation and regret. She approached slowly, her steps careful. In her hand, she held a bottle of water. She stopped a short distance away, then gently extended it toward the old man. "You might need this," she said softly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried sincerity. The old man reached out again. This time, his hands were steadier. He accepted the bottle and looked at her. Their eyes met. She lowered her gaze for a moment, as if she couldn't hold it for long. Maybe because she remembered walking past him earlier. Maybe because she wished she hadn't. The child watched all of this quietly. A small smile appeared on their face. Not big. Not proud. Just warm. More people began to slow down. Not out of curiosity anymore, but out of something deeper. One person took out some food from their bag. Another made a phone call, speaking in a low voice, asking for help, maybe for medical support, maybe for someone who could assist the old man properly. A young man removed his jacket and gently placed it near the old man's shoulders. No one made a scene. No one tried to take credit. But one by one, they came forward. The crowd was changing. The same people who had walked past him without a second glance were now stopping. Looking. Caring. The old man sat in the middle of it all, still holding his photograph close. But now, he was no longer alone. Voices surrounded him, not loud or overwhelming, but softer, kinder. Someone asked if he needed help. Another asked if he had somewhere to go. For the first time that day, people were speaking to him, not about him. He tried to respond, but his voice was weak. Still, it didn't matter. Because now, people were listening, even to his silence. The child remained beside him. The first one to stop. The one who had changed everything. The old man looked around slowly. At the faces. At the hands reaching out. At the small acts of kindness forming around him. His eyes filled with tears again. But this time, they carried something new. Relief. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer just a shadow on the sidewalk. He was being seen. He was being heard. He was being valued. And all of it started with one small moment. One question. One child who chose not to walk away. The street was still the same. But the people were not. Because kindness, once it begins, doesn't stay in one place. It spreads. quietly, powerfully, from one heart to another. And in that simple, beautiful way, the world, even if just for a moment, became a little more human. The street no longer felt the same. What had started as a moment of quiet pain had now turned into something alive, something filled with care. People stood around the old man, not in a crowd of strangers anymore, but like a circle of concern. The old man sat at the center, still holding his photograph close to his chest. But now, his posture had changed. He was no longer folded into himself. He was sitting a little straighter. As if, slowly, he was remembering who he used to be. A man who had made the phone call stepped closer. "They're coming," he said gently, speaking to the others nearby. "Someone will take him to a clinic." The words were simple, but they carried relief. The child looked up at the old man, their eyes bright with quiet hope. "You're going to be okay," the child said softly. The old man looked at the child. For a moment, he just stared, his eyes searching, almost as if trying to understand something deeper. Then, slowly, his lips moved. Not clearly, not strongly, but enough. A faint whisper. "Thank you." It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was weak, but it carried something powerful. Gratitude. The child smiled. Not a big smile. Not loud or proud. Just a gentle one, full of warmth. A woman stepped forward again, the same one who had once pulled her child away. This time, she knelt down slightly, adjusting the jacket that had been placed over the old man's shoulders. "You shouldn't sit here for long," she said quietly. "Help is coming." Her voice held care now, not fear. The old man nodded faintly. His hands, still trembling, loosened their grip slightly on the photograph. For the first time, he didn't hold it like something he might lose. He held it like something he could keep, without fear. In the distance, the faint sound of a vehicle approached. Not loud, but noticeable. The man who had made the call looked up. "They're here," he said. A small medical van pulled up near the sidewalk. Two helpers stepped out quickly but calmly. They moved with purpose, yet with kindness. Their eyes scanned the situation, then softened as they saw the old man. They approached slowly. "It's okay," one of them said gently. "We are here to help." The old man looked at them. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed his face. But then, he glanced at the child. The child nodded. That small gesture was enough. Carefully, the helpers supported him as he tried to stand. His legs were weak, his body unsteady, but he wasn't alone anymore. Hands held him. Voices guided him. Step by step, he rose. The crowd watched in silence. Not the same silence as before. This silence held respect. As they helped him toward the van, the old man paused. He turned his head slightly, looking back. At the child. Their eyes met one more time. No words were needed. The old man's expression said everything. Gratitude. Relief. Peace. The child raised their hand slightly. A small wave. The old man gave the faintest nod, then allowed himself to be guided forward. Into care. Into safety. Into something better than before. The van doors closed gently. And just like that, he was gone from the sidewalk. But not forgotten. The street slowly returned to its usual rhythm. People began to move again. Cars passed. Voices rose. Life continued. But something was different. Subtle, but real. The same man who had first stepped forward stood quietly, thinking. The woman who had once pulled her child away now held her child's hand more gently. Others walked away slower than before, their thoughts heavier, their hearts softer. They would remember this moment. Even if they didn't speak of it. Even if life pulled them back into its rush. Something inside them had changed. At the edge of the sidewalk, the child stood alone now. The school bag still hung on their shoulder. The lunchbox, now empty, rested in their hand. They looked at the spot where the old man had been sitting. It was empty. But it didn't feel empty. It felt meaningful. The child took a quiet breath, then turned, and walked back into the moving crowd. Not as someone who followed it, but as someone who had changed it. Because what happened that day was not something big. It was not loud. It was not planned. It was one small act. One simple choice. To stop. To care. To see. And that was enough. Because sometimes it only takes one moment of compassion to rewrite someone's story. The street looked the same as it always had. Cars still rushed by. People still moved quickly, their minds filled with places to go and things to do. The noise had returned to its usual rhythm, loud and constant. If someone walked past that sidewalk now, they might not notice anything unusual. There was no sign of what had happened. No mark. No memory left behind on the ground. But something had changed. Not in the street, but in the people. Every day, countless moments like this pass by unnoticed. Someone struggling. Someone hurting. Someone sitting quietly, hoping to be seen. And most of the time, they aren't. Not because people are cruel, but because they are busy, distracted, afraid, or simply used to looking the other way. It is easy to ignore, easy to walk past, easy to tell yourself, someone else will help. And so, no one does. But that day was different. Not because the crowd changed. Not because the world suddenly became kinder. But because one person made a different choice. A child. Small. Quiet. Ordinary. Yet brave enough to stop. Kind enough to care. Strong enough to listen to their heart, instead of their fear. That one moment broke something invisible. A barrier. A silence. A pattern that had been repeated over and over again. And once it broke, others followed. One step. Then another. Until the same crowd that once ignored became a group that cared. It didn't take much. No grand speech. No big action. Just a simple question. A small offering. A quiet presence. And yet, it was enough to change everything for one man. A man who had once been forgotten. A man who had almost lost hope. A man who, for a brief moment, felt invisible in a world full of people. But he was seen. Because someone chose to see him. The truth is simple. The world doesn't always change with big actions. Sometimes, it changes with the smallest ones. A pause instead of a step forward. A question instead of silence. A hand reached out, instead of turned away. The child didn't have power. Didn't have money. Didn't have influence. But they had something stronger. Compassion. And compassion spreads. From one heart to another. Quietly. Gently. But powerfully. Maybe the crowd will forget. Maybe life will pull them back into its rush. But somewhere, deep inside, a memory will remain. A reminder that they once saw something real. Something human. And maybe, the next time they see someone in pain, they will pause. Even if just for a second. Because the world didn't change that day. Because of many people. It changed. Because one person chose to care.